and maybe getting some forward motion going. Well, citizens, we talk about being vigilant, but that simply means that it's each person's obligation to educate themselves to the best of their ability on not simply the topic of ET or UFOs, but overall, to actively hunt down for information, not just simply accepting mainstream pre-chewed news that, there was a study done years ago during the first Gulf War in which the University of Colorado learned to their dismay that the more TV news somebody watched, the less they actually knew about the issues pertaining to the Gulf War. So there was an inverse relationship. And they said, well, this is a great failure of American news journalism. Well, in a way, you could look at it that way. But you could also look at it as really not a failure if the goal of TV news was simply to get viewers, not necessarily to educate. If the goal is to just get ratings high, well, they've done very well. So, in other words, not just trusting your television and not just trusting your mainstream AOL news server, but it is necessary to be active and to educate oneself. Regarding the UFO issue, there are some very good sources of information. One thing that I encourage people to do is to hunt down the legitimate, provable government documents that exist on this topic. They are easy to find. There's one computer network called CUFON, Computer UFO Network. They have a nice collection of proven Freedom of Information Act documents pertaining to UFOs. There's a very good website called The Black Vault by John Greenwald, who has thousands and thousands of government documents, many of which pertain to UFOs. Now, it's not always fun or easy to go through reams of documents, but I think it's not a bad place to start. There are some very good websites and books. I do think that my own book, UFOs and the National Security State, is a good first book for people to read in order to get acquainted with the general history of this phenomenon and the cover-up that's associated with it. It's really not clear to me which political party is more open to disclosure on UFOs than the other in the United States, whether it's a Democratic or a Republican thing. It's easy for people to think that, a Democratic administration might be more liberal in terms of releasing information on UFOs. It has happened historically that in the Carter and Clinton administrations that there was more openness on government documents, many of which pertain to UFOs. So both of those administrations were actually beneficial for UFO researchers. But it's also true that behind the scenes in the Republican administrations of Ronald Reagan, and I believe George Bush Sr., that there were initiatives behind the scenes to at least explore the possibility of official government disclosure on UFOs. Now, it's my understanding that, these were stopped as they got to a certain level. But now, for future presidential administrations, an administration that follows the Bush administration, what is the best likelihood? Was it Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton, or John McCain? I think it's impossible to know, honestly. Hillary Clinton clearly has had a connection with the UFO issue through Lawrence Rockefeller. And this now is absolutely confirmable. Some of the information that's come out of the Clinton archives confirms that Hillary Clinton was meeting with Lawrence Rockefeller in 1994-95 when Lawrence Rockefeller was absolutely adamant about pushing the UFO initiative. Bill Clinton also was meeting with Lawrence Rockefeller. So would that mean Hillary is more interested in promoting disclosure? Well, not necessarily. It's really hard to know. She's never, ever really talked about this publicly. Obama has not given any indication that he is particularly interested in this topic. But none of these things really matter. And the same with McCain. I don't really know where he would stand on this. So I think the issue of disclosure is going to be more driven by political necessities. The United States is heading toward a really difficult time in a lot of ways. Financially, we're heading towards some very possible economic difficulties. And when you have economic problems, they're going to cause political instability and political problems. And in periods of political instability, you have a very strong likelihood that people will say things that they wouldn't ordinarily say otherwise. This happened during the collapse of the Soviet Union. It happened right after the death of Mao Zedong in China. It happened in Spain after the death of Francisco Franco. When you have major changes in the way politics is done in a country, major leaks can occur. And I think that's very possible here in this country. And so I'm keeping my eyes and ears open. I think the next 10 years could very well bring something big. The other thing that's driving change is technology. 20 years ago, there was no such thing as an internet, really, a World Wide Web. It was an unforeseen development. And the growth of the internet has been absolutely critical in helping to open up the UFO issue. Because what we're discovering is that it's impossible to hide this information when you have an internet. Now, what will the next 10 years in technology bring? We really have a hard way of knowing this. But I think that we're in a very, very great state of flux in terms of our technology. And so that I think at the end of the next 10 or 20 years, we're going to have a society that looks very different than how it looks today. And so what's the specific engine of change, the specific engine of disclosure? I have no idea. But I do believe that we're in such a turbulent societal transformation that at the end of the day, there's going to be some form of disclosure on the matter of ETs here on Earth. I don't think it's going to be very good for people to be completely blindsided by a disclosure of ETs that comes out of nowhere, out of the blue. There's a great potential for certain people to be disturbed. If they're not prepared to have their worldview shaken, something like this is so big that I think there is a potential for a lot of people to become very emotionally disturbed by this reality. So I think if I were to give anybody advice on how to deal with it, it's to begin the process of opening your mind right now and to educate yourself on some of the facts associated with this topic, and to be ready now to challenge yourself and your belief system, and just ask yourself a simple question, which is it possible that a lot of important things I believe about this world today are in fact wrong? You know, human beings have been wrong about a lot of things in our history. Go back 5,000 years, go back 1,000 years, go back 50 years. We've held a lot of beliefs that have turned out to be wrong. So don't you think it's kind of foolish to think that maybe today none of that matters, that we've got everything right? Clearly, I think it's a bit of wisdom to assume that we still have a lot more to learn. And let's keep an open mind and get rid of the fanaticism about whatever it is you believe, and keep in mind the possibility that there's much, much more for you to learn.